Tonight, on Velvet Crimes, we step once more into the half-light of London's conscience, where truth bleeds through paper and ink remembers what men would rather forget. A trembling sound on Baker Street becomes the pulse of a vanished man, a confession written not in words, but in light, and a revelation that justice can glow even in darkness. Before we begin, remember, every secret leaves a stain, and not all vanish with rain. Tell me, have you ever seen truth appear only when dawn touches it? Subscribe to the channel and let the mystery begin. A faint tapping, like the tremor of a fountain pen against glass, echoed through Baker Street as I looked up from the morning paper. The sound came not from our visitor's hand, but from the ink bottle she clutched, trembling. The viscous black liquid quivered within, refusing to settle, as though the bottle itself shared her agitation. Holmes, who had been dissecting the residue of tobacco ash with his lens, did not raise his eyes. "You may set it down, madam," he said quietly. "You are safer without it." She obeyed, placing the small cut-glass bottle upon our table with exaggerated care. The tap of its base against wood formed the story's first note, a thin, hollow resonance that would not soon fade. "My name is Mrs. Armitage," she began, her voice breaking. "I come from Hampstead. My husband. He is a solicitor. Or was." Holmes's glance flicked toward me, then back to her. "You speak in the past tense. Has there been a death?" "No, Mr. Holmes. A disappearance. Last night he left his study to fetch more ink. At dawn I found the bottle empty, the window open, and his chair overturned." The words hung in the air like smoke. I noted how Holmes's gaze sharpened, not at the mention of her husband's absence, but at the curious domestic detail, the ink. "The bottle was empty, you say?" he murmured. "Completely?" "Yes. Though he had filled it only hours earlier. There were no stains upon the carpet, no sign of spillage." Holmes extended a hand. "May I?" She passed the bottle across. He held it up to the light, rotating it slowly. The glint from the gas lamp danced across his fingers. Within, the residue glistened faintly purple. "Watson," he said, "observe the rim. It has been wiped clean, not by a cloth, but by pressure of skin. Our absent solicitor may have emptied it deliberately." "Deliberately," I echoed. "But for what purpose?" Holmes smiled faintly. "That, my dear fellow, is the question worth the ink." He leaned closer, inhaling the faint chemical scent. "Note the odor, not of common gall ink, but of iron and ether. Curious. Mrs. Armitage, did your husband conduct experiments?" She hesitated. "He was writing something private. He forbade the servants to enter his study." I thought it a brief. Holmes tapped the bottle's lip. The sound, a hollow toque, echoed once more, rhythmic as to a metronome. "Not a brief, perhaps," he murmured, "but a confession." Her eyes widened. "You mean—" "I mean nothing yet," he interrupted softly. "Watson, fetch your hat. We go to Hampstead." The motion was instant. Holmes had already seized his coat and cane. Mrs. Armitage rose unsteadily, but he raised a calming hand. "Compose yourself, madam. Whatever your husband sought in that ink, we shall find in its silence." Outside, the drizzle hissed upon the street, each droplet carrying the same fragile rhythm as that bottle's tap. As our cab rattled northward, Holmes sat in silence, the small glass vial secure within his gloved hand. "You suspect more than disappearance," I ventured. He inclined his head. "Disappearance implies chance. This," he gestured toward the bottle, "suggests intention. Ink is the blood of thought, Watson. When a man drains it at dawn, he drains something of himself." The cab wheels splashed through puddles, the sound merging with the whisper of rain, our recurring motif taking shape. Holmes turned toward me suddenly. "Do you recall the case of the leaden pen?" "Vaguely. The clerk who forged signatures. Precisely. He used acid to dissolve authentic ink before substituting false entries. If our solicitor practiced similar art, Mrs. Armitage's empty bottle is no accident but evidence destroyed. Then you suspect forgery? He shook his head. Not yet. There is a pattern I cannot see. The ink's composition was altered. Iron and ether. Watson, what writing vanishes when light touches it? I frowned. Invisible ink. Exactly. Holmes's tone quickened, the mental engine catching. And what confession requires invisibility until dawn? Before I could reply, the cab jerked to a stop before a narrow lane veiled in fog. The driver muttered something about no further fares and retreated. The air tasted of iron, cold and metallic. Holmes stepped out, the sound of his boots crisp upon the wet cobbles. Listen, he said. A faint drip echoed from somewhere ahead. Steady, patient, the ink bottle's echo transposed into the open night. Ah, he murmured. Our motif continues. He raised his lantern. Beyond the gate loomed a darkened house, its windows blind. Observe, he whispered. No lamplight, yet the air smells of burning paper. I caught it too, that acrid tang of charred fiber. Holmes's voice dropped to a thread. He has tried to erase what he wrote. Let us see whether the dawn was merciful. The gate creaked open beneath his hand. The sound, soft yet final, merged with the drizzle's endless rhythm. The hinges gave a sigh as Holmes pushed the gate inward and stepped into the shadowed garden. The drizzle had thinned to a mist, each droplet catching the dim glow of his lantern before dissolving into air. The path beneath our feet was soft with moss and fallen leaves, and the faint drip that had guided us seemed to come now from within the house itself. Holmes paused before the door, running a gloved finger along the brass lock. No signs of forced entry, he murmured. A man who leaves by choice, not compulsion. He produced a thin sliver of metal from his sleeve, inserted it, and with one deft turn, the bolt yielded. The soft click echoed like a heartbeat in the silence. Inside, the air was heavy, ink, ash, and the bitter tang of something burnt. Holmes raised the lantern. Papers lay strewn across the carpet, most charred at the edges, as though a fire had been hurriedly extinguished. The hearth still smoldered faintly. Observe, he said, kneeling by the grate. The ashes are gray at the surface, but darker beneath. He burned them recently, then doused them with water. Hence the drip we heard. From the corner came a single, persistent drop. The sound striking a basin, one deliberate beat after another. The echo carried the same rhythm as the ink bottle's earlier tremor. I followed Holmes to the desk. The inkstand was overturned, its glass lid shattered, but the blotter was dry. Holmes bent closer, examining the writing surface. Not a word left, he muttered. Yet he wrote. Look here, Watson. Pressure marks upon the paper. Fetch the lamp nearer. He angled the light across the desk's grain, and faint grooves appeared, the ghosts of words once written. Holmes's expression tightened. Our missing ink has not betrayed us entirely. He opened his notebook, tore a blank sheet, and began rubbing the surface with the edge of a pencil. The impressions deepened like footprints appearing in snow. One line emerged clear enough to read, Not my own hand, ink that glows, dawn will reveal. Holmes leaned back. Ink that glows, he repeated softly. And the dawn, he was preparing a revelation visible only at first light. A scientific experiment, I suggested. Possibly, or a confession meant to appear. Not immediately, but when the world itself turned witness. What light exposes, darkness conceals. His tone carried that tautness I had learned to fear, when curiosity had begun to merge with unease. We moved to the hearth, where a heap of blackened paper hissed faintly. Holmes lifted a corner with his tweezers. He burned his notes, yet left traces of a viscous substance upon the edges. Smell it. I bent closer. Ether again. Indeed. He attempted to erase the visible, not the chemical. Foolish man. The ghost of truth always lingers. A sudden sound made us turn. A faint creak from the staircase above. Holmes set down the tweezers and extinguished the lantern's glare to a dull glow. "Someone remains," he whispered. We stood listening. The rhythm of the drip below was joined by another above. Softer, hesitant footsteps upon wood. Holmes motioned me toward the hearth as he ascended. The stair groaned once beneath his weight, then silence. Moments later, a gasp cut through the still air. I rushed upward and found him standing before an open doorway, his lantern raised. Within, a young woman sat upon a bed, her eyes wide, her hands clasped around a candle that had burned down to its final inch. "Please," she whispered, "do not tell him I am here." Holmes's gaze softened, though his voice remained even. "That would depend, Miss Clara Armitage," she said. "My father's niece. I came this morning. He's gone, isn't he?" Holmes inclined his head. "We seek to learn precisely that." She nodded, trembling. "I heard him last night, pacing. Then a sound, like glass breaking. When I came down, the door was locked from inside. This morning it stood open. Did you enter the study?" "Yes. I saw the papers, and the window, and I feared to remain." Holmes stepped nearer, examining her candle. "You have burned this since dawn." She hesitated. "It comforts me. I thought the light might bring him back." Holmes's voice gentled. "Light reveals more than it returns, Miss Armitage. Tell me, did your uncle speak of anyone he distrusted?" She looked down. "A client named Draycott, a man from the city. They argued over money and documents. Uncle said he would settle the matter before the sun rose." "Did he?" Her eyes filled. "He went to his desk, sir, and I heard the ink bottle roll. Then silence." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. The bottle again. Always the sound of it, like a pulse marking time through each witness. He turned back to her. "Did this Draycott visit here?" "Once. He brought papers sealed with blue wax. Uncle said they were dangerous." Holmes's mouth tightened. "Blue wax. Government issue, or forgery thereof. Watson, note that." He turned toward the window, where the faintest shimmer glowed upon the sill. "Ah, our invisible ink speaks." In the pallid moonlight, faint letters had begun to bloom upon the wood. Not black, but a ghostly violet sheen. Holmes leaned close, reading under his breath, "The dawn will clear my name." He exhaled slowly. He wrote upon the sill itself, primitive yet desperate. He wished it seen by morning, and yet he is gone. I said quietly, "You think he meant to die?" Holmes's eyes flickered. "Not die, vanish, but under whose compulsion and to what end? The answer lies in that bottle." He turned sharply, the glint of the vial catching what little light remained. Its contents were altered to reveal under dawn's spectrum, not firelight. He trusted the sun to finish his statement. "We shall oblige him." The young woman clutched her candle. "You mean to wait here?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Not wait. Work. Watson, inspect the window ledge for prints while I test this residue." He produced a small lens and a folded strip of paper from his case. The silence between us was broken only by the double rhythm. Drip from below, drip from above. Twin heartbeats of the house. Holmes straightened at last. "No ordinary ink. The solvent is rare, obtainable only through a certain chemist in Lambeth. We shall visit him before the dawn he so anticipated." He extinguished the candle in Clara's hand, the hiss merging with the eternal drip. "Fear not, Miss Armitage. When morning comes, it will reveal more than ink." We descended once more, the rhythm of our steps matching that of the dripping water, steady and inevitable. Holmes paused at the door and looked back. "Watson, remember that sound, By the time it ceases, we may know whether we hunt a murderer or a ghost. Outside, the rain began again, light as ink falling upon paper. The rain had thickened by the time we reached Lambeth, the cab's wheels hissing through the gutters like ink drawn swiftly across a page. Holmes sat forward, the small glass bottle gleaming in his hand each time the gas lamps flickered past. His silence was not indifference but calculation. I could almost hear the rhythm of his thought keeping time with the patter on the roof. At last he said, "You observed, Watson, the faint violet sheen on the window ledge?" "Yes, the same hue as the residue inside that bottle." "Exactly. Our solicitor's ink was no commercial mixture. It was chemically reactive to the solar spectrum. Few could prepare such a compound. One, perhaps two men in London." He tapped the glass lightly. The note rang hollow, its tone merging with the cab's rattling. "And both dwell south of the river." I smiled faintly. "Then we seek a chemist who deals in ghosts and daylight." Holmes allowed himself a brief grin. "An apt description. The name I suspect will not surprise you. Tobias Morel, formerly assistant at the university laboratory, dismissed for selling restricted reagents. His shop remains under the pretext of an apothecary." The cab halted with a jerk. The sign above the narrow doorway read, "Morel's Remedies, Tinctures and Tonics." A dim lamp burned behind warped glass. Holmes stepped out, the sound of rain upon his umbrella sharp and deliberate. Inside, the air stung of ammonia and oil. Shelves sagged under dusty bottles. Behind the counter, a man with hollow cheeks and ink-stained fingers looked up from a ledger. His eyes flicked first to Holmes, then to the bottle in his hand. "You're late," he said. Holmes inclined his head. "Late for what, Mr. Morel?" The chemist hesitated, then forced a dry laugh. "Ah, my mistake. You have the look of a collector. Many come seeking old inks. Antique restorers, you know." Holmes set the vial upon the counter. The faint clink echoed through the cramped room. "This particular vintage," he said mildly, "was compounded within the last week. Its reaction to light suggests your hand." Morel's smile faded. "I sell no poison, sir." "Nor are you accused of doing so," Holmes replied. "We inquire about a commission from a solicitor named Armitage of Hampstead." The man's pupils contracted. "Never heard of him." Holmes's tone remained conversational. "Curious. The formula bears your signature solvent ratio, iron, ether, trace luminescent salts. Your old mentor, Dr. Richardson, published it under your initials." A beat of silence. Outside, rain tapped the window pane in precise rhythm. Morel's shoulders sagged. If I did supply him, it was no crime. He said he needed an ink that would appear only under dawn light. He paid in advance. "For what purpose did he claim to use it?" Holmes asked. The chemist swallowed. "To reveal his will. He said there were those who watched him, people who'd contest it before it could be read. He wanted it visible only to his niece and a certain Draycott." At that name, Holmes's eyes brightened. "Draycott again. Describe him." "Tall, neat, military mustache. Wore gloves even indoors. Spoke little but paid well." Holmes nodded slowly. "And when did he collect the ink?" 2 nights ago. He said Mr. Armitage was unwell and had sent him." "Did that strike you as credible?" The chemist hesitated. "No." His hands trembled when I gave him the bottle. "I thought it nerves." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, what strikes you about a man who fetches invisible ink at midnight for another?" "That he intends to hide something rather than reveal it." "Precisely." Holmes looked back to Morel. "You kept no record of this transaction?" "I destroy all such notes. Safer that way." Holmes's gaze lingered a moment. Then, with disarming politeness, he said, "Thank you, Mr. Morel. Your discretion may yet serve justice." We stepped out into the rain. Holmes paused beneath the awning, the water drumming above us like quickened breath. So, Watson, Draycott possessed the ink before our solicitor vanished. Therefore, the message upon the window, "The dawn will clear my name," was not the product of Armitage's own hand alone. You suspect forgery? Something subtler, collaboration or coercion. The ink was meant to reveal a truth. Draycott may have twisted it to hide another. As we turned toward the river, a constable approached from the fog, his lantern beam slicing through the drizzle. "Beg pardon, gentlemen," he called. "Did you just come from Morell's shop?" Holmes regarded him sharply. "We did. Why?" "Inspector Lestrade's orders, sir. The man's wanted for dealing in restricted chemicals. We've been watching the place." Holmes smiled thinly. "Ah, Lestrade moves in timely circles. Tell him I shall call upon him shortly, with a matter likely to interest him." The constable tipped his helmet and strode off. Holmes resumed walking, his umbrella tapping the pavement in cadence with the rain. Another thread joins the weave. Lestrade's interest may aid us, though he will not thank us for it. We hailed a cab toward Baker Street. Within, Holmes removed the cork from the vial and dipped a gloved fingertip into the residue, holding it toward the faint light that leaked through the window. It glowed pale blue. "Note this reaction," he said. "The ink becomes visible under electric light as well as dawn's rays. We shall test its message in our own rooms before morning." I watched the blue shimmer fade back to black. "Holmes," I said quietly, "if Draycott used this to forge or alter a will, what of Mrs. Armitage and her niece? They are the intended victims, or unwilling accomplices." The cab jolted suddenly, wheels striking a rut. From the pocket of Holmes's coat, the vial gave a faint chime, echoing our motif with eerie precision. He glanced at it as if listening. That sound again, a hollow resonance, never silent. Each repetition carries us nearer to the truth. When we reached Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson had long retired. Holmes lit the lamps and set the vial upon a white cloth. The glow, faint at first, deepened until letters began to shimmer upon the glass itself. Impressions from whatever paper it had touched. Holmes bent low. "Watson, do you see? The ink retains memory of its last inscription." Through the glass, we could discern fragmentary lines, reversed as in a mirror. Clause, Draycott, transfer, sealed. "A will indeed," Holmes murmured. "But altered." He drained the bottle to erase the original and refill it with deception. I leaned closer. Then Armitage discovered it and tried to expose the fraud before dawn. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Which explains his disappearance. The one thing he could not hide, his conscience, has driven him either underground or to silence. He turned abruptly to the window, where rain whispered against the glass. "Watson, recall the rhythm from Hampstead, the double drip, one above, one below." "Yes. Listen now." From somewhere within the room came that same measured drop, faint but insistent. Holmes strode to the corner, lifted the carpet, and revealed a small dark stain spreading slowly from the skirting board. "Good heavens," I whispered. "Blood?" Holmes touched it lightly. Not fresh. A diluted ink compound, the same chemical trace. But how did it reach here? He straightened, eyes gleaming. "Because, my dear fellow, the game has come to us. Someone has entered this room tonight." The lamp flickered as if in answer, and a new sound, the soft closing of a door downstairs, cut through the rain. Holmes's hand shot out, extinguishing the lamp in one swift motion. The room plunged into darkness, broken only by the dim phosphorescent shimmer from the ink stain on the floor. The faint sound of the downstairs latch settling echoed upward, followed by a hesitant step upon the stair. "Keep still, Watson," Holmes whispered. "We'll allow our caller to declare his purpose." The next step came, then another, deliberate, weight-bearing, as though the man wished to be heard but not challenged. Holmes moved soundlessly toward the door. The faint click of his revolver's hammer reached my ear. Now, he murmured, and flung the door wide. A figure froze upon the landing, tall, narrow-shouldered, drenched by the rain. His gloved hand clutched the banister, the other held a crumpled hat. The gaslight from the hall struck across a lean face with clipped mustache and the wary eyes of a soldier. "Good evening, Mr. Draycott," Holmes said calmly. The man started. How do you know me?" "By deduction, of course. You smell of ether and damp leather. Your gloves, I observe, are flecked with iron salt. A man who carries the odor of invisible ink and the conscience of a lawyer's client can hardly be another." Draycott's expression hardened. "I came here for protection, Mr. Holmes, not accusation." "Then you are doubly fortunate," Holmes replied, motioning him inside. "We can provide both." He struck a match and relit the lamp. The sudden flare illuminated Draycott's face, strained, pallid, the rain tracing sharp lines down his cheekbones. The faint dripping from his coat sleeve joined our relentless motif, ticking softly against the floorboards. "Speak, sir," Holmes said. "The hour grows late, and truth, like ink, congeals when withheld." Draycott sank into the chair nearest the hearth. "You must believe me. I had no part in Armitage's disappearance. I warned him. He was losing his reason over that document." Holmes regarded him evenly. "Which document?" "The codicil to his will. He feared his estate would be seized by the Crown because of certain irregularities in his firm's dealings. He meant to transfer it secretly to his niece, Miss Clara." "And you objected?" Holmes asked. "I advised him to destroy it. The paper was already tainted, signed under duress, perhaps even under influence. He would ruin himself." "Yet," Holmes said quietly, "you collected from a chemist a solution designed to render the writing invisible." Draycott's eyes widened. "He told you?" "Chemistry tells no lies," Holmes replied. "Why seek invisible ink for a document you wish destroyed?" The man hesitated, then clenched his hands. "Because he demanded it. He said the light would prove his honor, that when dawn came, the truth would clear his name. I supplied the means. But when I returned the next night to dissuade him, he was gone." "Gone where?" "I found the study locked. Through the window I saw him at his desk, unmoving. I fetched help, but when we broke in, he had vanished. The ink bottle lay shattered. There was blood on the sill. I felt a chill run through me." "Blood?" Draycott nodded. "A smear only, but enough. I thought him dead, yet no body was found." Holmes leaned forward. "Then why come here tonight?" The man drew from his coat a folded paper, wrapped carefully in oilskin. "Because this appeared on my doorstep an hour ago." Holmes took it, unwrapped the cover, and unfolded the sheet. Across it ran a faint violet script, the same spectral shade as the residue in the vial. The words shimmered just long enough to read, "The dawn sees all. Tell her not to weep. A." Holmes's face remained unreadable. "Delivered by whom?" "I cannot say. I heard a knock, opened the door, and found only that." Holmes's gaze flicked to the door, then to the floor where the ink stain had spread. "Watson, note the coincidence. Ink at our feet, message at his door, both within the same hour." Draycott rose abruptly. "You think me capable of staging this? I tell you, I'm terrified. Whoever plays with that ink now plays with death." Holmes's eyes flashed. "You know more of its composition than you admit." Draycott's voice dropped. "He experimented with light reactive compounds, but there was another element, a catalyst he called the witness. Said it bound truth to ink. I never understood." Holmes regarded him sharply. "And this catalyst, where did it come from?" "From blood," Draycott whispered. "His own." A long silence followed, broken only by the rhythmic drip from his coat. Holmes set the paper upon the table and leaned back. "So our missing solicitor wrote with his own life's essence. Fitting, perhaps, that his confession reveals itself only in light." It transforms our investigation from legal to moral. I said. Then this message, "Tell her not to weep," was written posthumously. Holmes shook his head. More likely prearranged. The ink's activation could be delayed by us if sealed from light. Draycott, you are sure it arrived just now? I swear it. Holmes's expression softened slightly. Then he lives. Or someone who knows his art lives for him. He turned the page toward the lamp. The letters brightened once more, the glow reflecting in his eyes. Watson, mark the texture. It is uneven, as if written on coarse wood, not paper. The window ledge, I exclaimed. Precisely. This sheet is an impression, pressed upon another surface while still damp. The writer stood over the sill, wrote upon the wood, and laid this atop it to capture the residue. The message we saw in Hampstead and this one are twins. Draycott looked from one to the other of us. Then someone must have taken the first copy before we arrived. Holmes nodded. A thief of confessions. He rose suddenly and crossed to the window, throwing it open. The cold rain swept in, mingling with the sound of the street below. Somewhere, a clock struck 3. We are no longer hunting a disappearance, Watson, he said. We pursue a resurrection. A man who wrote himself invisible and left the dawn to betray him. He turned back, his gaze fixed on Draycott. You will remain under my observation until morning, if your conscience is clean. You have nothing to fear. If not, Draycott's voice trembled. You think I killed him? I think you helped him vanish, and now fear what he might reveal from wherever he hides. The man's lips parted, but before he could speak, another sound pierced the moment, the soft crack of glass from the study window, followed by a faint, hollow drip. Holmes's head snapped toward it. There, he breathed, our motif repeats itself. The ink still bleeds. Holmes was across the room in an instant. The window pane glittered with a thin fracture that spidered from its center, and beneath it a single droplet hung trembling before falling to the sill with a tiny, resonant tap. That hollow sound, the same pulse that had followed us since Hampstead, filled the silence like the ticking of a metronome marking the progress of some unseen hand. Holmes held his lantern low. Do you see, Watson? The pattern repeats not by chance, but by design. The drip carries the same chemical luminescence as the ink, faintly violet under the lamp. I bent close. Then someone has been here within the last minutes. He nodded, and has left us a reply. Holmes traced the droplet's path along the wooden frame. The streak glowed faintly as though alive. This is not water. It contains iron gall and albumin. The composition matches the ink Armitage created. Our visitor either carried it or bleeds it. Draycott rose from his chair, his face gray. You think he was here? That Armitage came himself? Holmes gave him a long, unreadable look. Either he or the shadow he cast. Sit down, sir. Your agitation serves no purpose save to disturb the chemistry of truth. He turned back to the sill. Watson, bring the blotting paper. We shall see if the message hides beneath the surface. I pressed the sheet gently against the glass. When Holmes withdrew it, a faint outline shimmered. Distorted words, fragments strung together by the violet hue. Holmes read them under his breath. Dawn. Ledger. The key. And then folded the paper carefully. The key, he repeated softly. Every cipher has one, and so does every man. Draycott, did Armitage keep a safe or locked cabinet? Yes, in his study. But it was untouched. Are you sure? Holmes asked. Many locks yield without visible violence. Tell me, did he ever speak of a place where he wrote privately? Draycott hesitated. Only once. He mentioned the attic, an old nursery he had converted into a reading room, but it was sealed years ago. Holmes's eyes brightened. Sealed places interest me, especially when light is involved. The morning will find us in Hampstead again. He turned sharply, extinguished the lantern, and slipped the recovered sheet into his pocket. "Watson, fetch your revolver. The pattern of intrusion suggests we are already being observed." Before I could move, a faint knock came from the front door. 3 slow raps, then silence. Holmes's head inclined. "Right on cue," he murmured. "Watson, stay behind me." He crossed the room, revolver in hand, and opened the door a fraction. The hall lamp cast a dim halo on a figure standing motionless in the threshold. It was Clara Armitage, her cloak soaked through, eyes wide with exhaustion and dread. "Miss Armitage," I exclaimed, "you should not be here." "I had to come," she cried softly. "The house in Hampstead. It isn't empty any longer." Holmes stepped aside to let her in. "Explain." "I returned after you left. There was light in the study, moving light as if from a lantern. I thought it was you, but when I called out, the window shut by itself. Then something struck the glass. I fled, but I saw his shadow, Mr. Holmes. My uncle's." Holmes exchanged a brief glance with me. "Describe the shadow." It was bent forward, as though writing. The faint drip from the sill punctuated her words, as if echoing the motion of an unseen pen. Holmes's tone softened. "You are certain it was not imagination?" Her lip trembled. "It wrote upon the air. I swear it." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Not the air, Miss Armitage. The vapor of ether. If your uncle's experiments produced an ink reactive to light, its residue might well shimmer when agitated by heat or movement. What you saw was chemistry, not spirit." "But the writing," she protested. "I could almost read it. Ledger, key, dawn." Holmes's hand tightened around his cane. "The same words that appeared here moments ago. He communicates through sequence. A scientist's mind leaving trace experiments as testimony. The ledger, then, must hold his true statement." Draycott's voice cracked. "There is no ledger. I searched every drawer." Holmes turned on him sharply. "And that is precisely why I believe it exists. You were meant to fail." He strode to the table, where the paper bearing the message lay faintly glowing. Armitage designed his ink to survive destruction, invisible until summoned. What if his ledger was treated the same way? A book burned or hidden would still hold the truth until the proper light exposed it. "Then where is it?" I asked. Holmes tapped the paper. He told us. "The key. A deliberate clue. If his message appears at dawn, the key may lie where dawn first enters the house. The attic window." He turned briskly. "Miss Armitage, you will remain here under Mrs. Hudson's care. Draycott, you accompany us back to Hampstead. I mean to greet your colleague's ghost with the courtesy of daylight." Draycott tried to protest, but Holmes's gaze silenced him. Within minutes, we were in a cab again, the rain easing into a faint hiss. The city's lamps flickered past like notes in the same unending rhythm. Drip, step, breath, drip. Holmes sat rigid, the recovered vial in his hand. "Watson, observe how the pattern persists. Each recurrence of the sound motif signals proximity to the truth. Tonight it drips from glass. By dawn, perhaps, from conscience." He looked out at the paling horizon. "Do you smell it?" "The air?" I asked. "The faint metallic tang. Not rain. Iron oxide." We approached the source. Hampstead lay wrapped in fog when we arrived. Holmes dismissed the driver and led us up the garden path. The house loomed dark except for a faint glimmer at its topmost window. "The attic," he whispered. "He invites us." The door yielded easily beneath his touch. Inside, the rhythm greeted us again. Drip from above, steady and cold. Holmes followed it up the staircase, lantern shuttered low, until we reached a small trap-door. He pushed it open, and the smell of burnt paper mingled with the metallic scent. Within, the attic was bare save for a single desk beneath the slanted roof. Upon it lay a closed ledger, its cover blackened, its lock broken. From its edge dripped a thin, luminous thread that struck the floor with a sound sharp as a heartbeat. Holmes approached slowly. "Our ink returns to its source," he murmured. "Watson, this is his confession," Draycott whispered hoarsely. Then he truly— "Wait," Holmes cut in. "Look closer." Etched faintly upon the ledger's cover, glowing like veins beneath skin, were words forming even as we watched. "The man you trust holds the final pen." Holmes turned to Draycott, eyes blazing. "So, sir, the dawn has begun to write against you." Before the man could answer, a sudden crash below, the slamming of the front door, broke the silence. Holmes straightened. "We are not alone." Holmes was at the attic door in an instant, motioning for silence. The reverberation of the slammed door below quivered faintly through the joists. Then came the unmistakable creak of a cautious tread upon the lower stair. We could hear it clearly in that narrow space, every step deliberate, unhurried, and without hesitation. "Watson," Holmes breathed, "keep your revolver ready, but do not fire unless I move first." Draycott stood rooted, his face drained of color. Who would come at this hour? "Someone who believes himself entitled to finish what dawn began," Holmes said grimly. He extinguished the lantern so that only the phosphorescent drip from the ledger glimmered faintly, painting the boards in streaks of ghostly violet. The steps mounted, slow, then quicker. The rhythm matched the dripping ink in uncanny counterpoint. When the intruder reached the landing, Holmes moved. He flung open the attic door and called sharply, "Come up, sir. You have been expected." There was a startled pause, then a voice, hoarse, low, unmistakably male. "Mr. Holmes?" Holmes drew a quick breath. "Armitage." The figure that appeared in the narrow opening seemed more shadow than man. His coat hung soaked and torn, his face a ghastly pallor beneath streaks of dried ink. Yet his eyes burned with life. "Stand back," Holmes said quietly. "You are ill, but not dead." Armitage steadied himself against the doorframe. "Not dead," he repeated, the words rough as sand. "Merely unfinished." Draycott gave a strangled cry. You were in the river. I saw them drag—" "You saw what I intended," Armitage cut in. His voice trembled, but the will behind it held firm. "A decoy coat, soaked with the compound, left to convince all who wished me gone. And you, Draycott, wished it most of all." Draycott backed away. "That's false. I tried to save you." Holmes raised a hand. "Let him speak. This confession has been long delayed." Armitage's gaze turned to the desk. "You've found my ledger." "Indeed," Holmes replied, "and it speaks still, though only by light." The solicitor gave a thin smile. "The ink tells what I could not. Draycott forged my will, siphoning the solvent meant to protect it. I discovered the crime too late to prove it by ordinary means, so I turned to chemistry. I wrote my truth in light itself, and vanished before they could destroy it." Draycott's composure shattered. "Madness! You ruined yourself with those experiments. Invisible ink, glowing paper, no court would believe it." "Perhaps not," Holmes said evenly, "but science often writes in advance of law. Your denial, sir, will soon fade as swiftly as your deceit." Armitage stepped forward, gripping the ledger. The motion dislodged another droplet that fell with that same haunting tock against the floor. I left the first message upon the window to guide whoever sought me. I knew light would reveal it at dawn, and that only a mind trained to see patterns would read it. Holmes inclined his head. "You flatter me, sir, but tell me, why return now and at such peril?" "To ensure the confession completes itself." His eyes glimmered. "The compound's final reaction occurs only once. It binds to blood and air. Without the catalyst of truth, it dies." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Meaning?" "I must finish what I began, in my own hand." He turned toward the desk, dipping his fingers into the residual ink. The luminous liquid traced across the page as he wrote, each stroke glowing fiercely before fading into translucence. I leaned closer and saw the words form. Draycott forged my name to his prophet. He threatened my niece. He will claim I took my life, but I live. Enough! Draycott lunged forward, seizing Armitage by the shoulder. You'll damn us both. Holmes was faster. He caught Draycott's wrist and twisted sharply. The man cried out, releasing his hold. The struggle sent the ink bottle from the table. It struck the floor and shattered, spreading a dark mirror across the boards. The smell of ether filled the room. Stand still, Holmes commanded. That fluid is volatile. Armitage staggered back, his breathing labored. It's too late. The reaction begins at contact with heat. Indeed, faint sparks shimmered where the liquid touched the lantern's metal base. Holmes sprang forward, kicking it aside before flame could catch. The sound of dripping quickened. More droplets striking from the ledger's edge, merging into a steady patter. Draycott slumped against the wall, trembling. I swear, Holmes, I never meant to harm him, only to delay his ruin. He'd have dragged me down with his debts. Holmes's voice cut through the smoke rising from the floorboards. And so you forged his will to seize his estate, trusting his experiments to hide your tampering. You miscalculated. His science preserved what your conscience could not. The air thickened with chemical vapor. Each breath carried the acrid sting of iron and ether. Holmes caught my arm. Watson, open the skylight. I obeyed. A thin blade of dawn light pierced the gloom, falling directly upon the ledger. The ink within blazed to life, revealing the full confession in lines of radiant violet. Armitage stared, awestruck. You see? The dawn clears my name. Holmes's expression softened. It does more. It condemns the man beside you. Draycott buried his face in his hands. I was desperate, he muttered. He'd found out I only meant to frighten him into silence. Holmes regarded him coldly. You succeeded too well. The light broadened, spilling across the floor where the spilled ink shimmered like mercury. For an instant the attic seemed alive with ghostly luminescence, each droplet echoing the motif that had haunted us. Drip, drip, until even the sound felt like the house itself, breathing relief. Then Armitage swayed. I caught him as he fell, his pulse faint but steady. He's exhausted, I said. The fumes have near overcome him. Holmes knelt beside us. His work is done. The rest lies with daylight. We half-carried, half-guided the man to the stair, leaving Draycott slumped amid the pale glow of his ruin. The ink on the ledger continued to pulse faintly, each flicker marking the rhythm of the confession as though the paper itself still spoke. At the landing, Holmes paused and turned back once. Watson, he murmured. Listen. From below came the slow, hollow drip, but not of ink now. It was water from the opened skylight, falling through the quiet house, washing the residue away. Holmes's voice lowered. So ends the night's experiment. But something tells me Dawn has not finished writing yet. Holmes and I guided Armitage carefully down the narrow staircase, his weight sagging between us. Each step groaned underfoot, and from above we heard the gentle patter of rain through the broken skylight, a softer echo of that eternal dripping which had followed us since the first moment the ink trembled in its bottle. The rhythm persisted even now, carrying through the quiet house like the last pulse of a heart unwilling to die. At the foot of the stairs, Holmes paused to glance back. The light of morning had begun to filter down from the open hatch, faintly violet where it struck the air still dense with vapor. Curious, he murmured. The ink's compound continues to react. The process is not yet stable. Draycott stirred behind us, his voice small and cracked. You can't take him out. He needs air. He'll die before you reach the door. Holmes turned sharply. He'll die only if his own creation consumes him, and that is precisely what I intend to prevent. Watson, the street. Quickly. We carried Armitage into the study where the hearth still held the cold scent of last night's burned papers. Holmes drew back the curtains. Dawn flooded the room. As the light touched Armitage's hands, faint glimmers bloomed where the ink had dried into his skin. "Observe," Holmes said. "His body is saturated with the compound. The ether fumes combined with the iron salts in the bloodstream, a dangerous alchemy of truth and flesh. His very pulse carries the confession." I felt for that pulse. It beat weakly, each throb faint as the drip that had haunted the night. "He needs rest, Holmes. This is beyond chemistry. He's half poisoned." Holmes's gaze was fixed on the shimmer across Armitage's fingers. "And yet it is this poison that will clear his name. If the ink reacts as I suspect, exposure to full daylight will precipitate a visible signature. Proof against forgery." Draycott stepped forward, shaking. "You'll kill him for your experiment." Holmes's eyes blazed. "No, sir. He will live by it. The truth is an element that, once released, cannot be destroyed." He motioned me toward the window. "Watson, draw the sash." As I obeyed, the cold morning light poured in, striking across the solicitor's motionless form. Slowly, as though responding to breath itself, faint letters began to emerge upon his wrist, not carved or written, but blooming beneath the skin in translucent violet. Holmes leaned close. "The final proof," he whispered. "Look there. The same hand that penned the confession now writes upon its own vessel." The words, though fragmented, were legible. "This is my true hand, and no other's mark may claim it." Draycott uttered a strangled noise. "You cannot use that. It's madness, trickery." Holmes straightened. "It is science, sir, and your undoing." He turned to me. "Watson, note the temperature. The reaction stabilizes as the sun rises. When it reaches its peak, the signature will fix permanently. We have until then to ensure Lestrade sees it." I frowned. "You mean to involve Scotland Yard? Who better to witness the light of truth?" Draycott backed toward the door. "You won't drag me to the yard like some common criminal. I'll go myself and tell them he's delirious, that you're deceived by a dying man's ramblings." Holmes's hand shot out, gripping his arm with iron strength. "You will not move an inch until this evidence completes itself." A sudden hiss drew our attention. The ink upon Armitage's skin began to spread upward, forming faint branching lines along his arm, like roots seeking the light. He groaned, opening his eyes. "Holmes," he whispered, "don't let it fade." "It won't," Holmes said softly. "You've done your part, Mr. Armitage. The dawn writes in your stead." Armitage's gaze turned to Draycott. "You thought you could silence me with paper and fire, but light cannot burn." Draycott wrenched free, staggering toward the door. Holmes intercepted him. "You will wait," he said coldly, "until daylight confirms the story you tried to erase." "Confirms?" Draycott spat. "It will kill him." Holmes's reply came quietly. "Then the death will speak louder than your living words." For a long moment, no one moved. The sun had risen higher now, pouring its pale warmth through the window. The violet hue upon Armitage's arm deepened to indigo, then fixed, a delicate lattice of lines as precise as any handwriting. Holmes took out his lens, examined it, and nodded slowly. "It is complete. The ink's final reaction bonds permanently with the protein structure of the skin. Immovable. A living affidavit, if ever science has produced one." He turned toward me. "Fetch a cab. We are taking this man to Baker Street, where Lestrade will join us. The confession must be witnessed before fatigue or interference can undo it." Draycott slumped into the nearest chair, burying his head in his hands. "You've no proof of my intent." Holmes's tone was cutting. "On the contrary, I possess chemical evidence, motive, and witness, and more than that, conscience, which has already declared its verdict in the very blood of your victim." He turned to Armitage, whose eyes fluttered half open again. "Can you hear me?" A faint nod. "Clara, tell her the light kept its promise." Holmes's face softened. "She will know." I fetched my coat and stepped into the street to call for the cab. The drizzle had ceased, but the air carried that faint, metallic scent we had followed since the beginning. The ghost of the ink's reaction. Behind me, through the open door, came Holmes's voice, steady and low, soothing his weakened witness. When I returned, Holmes had covered Armitage with his own cloak. "He will recover," he said. "His mind is strong, though his body falters. The truth has burned through the fever." As we lifted the man once more, a faint tock sounded behind us. I looked back. The ink bottle on the desk had cracked clean through, its final droplet falling to the floor. The sound was soft, final, inevitable. Holmes glanced toward it. "The motif concludes itself, Watson, the last pulse of a dying deception. But mark me, there is still one interval left before the cadence resolves. The truth may yet bleed once more before it rests." We stepped into the pale light of morning, the cab waiting with its horse stamping impatiently on the wet street. Holmes helped Armitage inside, then turned to me with that look I knew too well. Sharp, distant, alive with unfinished thought. "Watson," he said, "before we reach Baker Street, I mean to prove one final theorem, that guilt, once exposed to light, can never again cast a shadow." As the cab jolted forward, the faint chime of glass from the shattered bottle followed us into the awakening city. The cab wheels struck the cobbles in quick succession, the sound ringing like the echo of that last shattering drip. Holmes sat opposite me, his eyes fixed upon Armitage, who slumped between us beneath the heavy folds of Holmes's cloak. Every jolt of the cab sent the morning light trembling across the man's arm, where the violet tracery glowed stubbornly through the fabric. An inscription that would not fade. "Remarkable," Holmes murmured. "Even in dim light the lines persist. It seems your ink, Mr. Armitage, is determined to outlive both crime and confession." The solicitor's lips parted. "It was meant to endure," he whispered. Holmes leaned forward. "Then you have achieved immortality of a kind, though not, I imagine, the form your accomplice anticipated." Draycott said nothing. He sat rigid beside me, his gaze fixed on the floor, every nerve in him wound taut as wire. The clatter of hooves and the rhythmic creak of the harness filled the silence, the city awakening around us. That familiar beat, metal, wheel, and drop, wove itself once more into our chain of sound. "Holmes," I said quietly, "are you certain the Yard will credit such evidence? Even Lestrade may balk at ink that glows upon the skin." Holmes smiled faintly. "Science, my dear Watson, is a lamp that seldom pleases those who dwell in darkness. Yet once lit, it cannot be unseen. When Lestrade witnesses that arm, his skepticism will yield to arithmetic. One does not dispute the multiplication table." He turned his gaze to Draycott. "Do you grasp what your colleague has achieved? He has given truth a physical body, made it luminous. Your forgeries and lies are visible only in shadow. His confession exists wherever light falls." Draycott's jaw worked soundlessly. "He'll die for it," he said at last. "You'll see." "Perhaps," Holmes answered. "But if death must come, it will arrive accompanied by vindication, not shame. You, sir, will find no such escort." At that, Armitage stirred again. "Let him speak," he murmured. "The guilty must be heard to complete their undoing." Holmes regarded him with quiet respect. "You bear the soul of a philosopher, Mr. Armitage. The world will call you eccentric, posterity will name you precise." The cab lurched as it turned into Baker Street. Holmes tapped the roof, and the driver drew to a halt before our door. Mrs. Hudson, startled from her morning routine, hurried out with an exclamation as we lifted our burden inside. "Good heavens, Mr. Holmes, is the gentleman—" "Alive," Holmes replied shortly. "But his spirit has travelled further than his pulse. Prepare the sofa, if you please." Within moments, Armitage lay stretched across the settee, the light from the bay window falling upon his hand. Lestrade, summoned by telegram at dawn, arrived before Holmes had finished bandaging the worst of the chemical burns. "Well, here we are again," the inspector remarked, his small eyes roving the scene. "And what's this? Another experiment gone wrong?" Holmes gestured toward Armitage's arm. "An experiment, yes, though not his. Observe." Lestrade bent, squinting. "Looks like bruising." Holmes handed him the magnifying lens. "Hold it nearer the window." As the sunlight touched the skin, the faint violet letters brightened into clarity. Lestrade gave a low whistle. "Well, I'll be writing." "But how?" Holmes's voice carried that crisp undertone of satisfaction I had come to recognize. The compound within his blood reacted to light, rendering his final statement indelible. "You will find it reads, in essence, that Mr. Draycott forged his will and attempted to erase the evidence through destruction of all visible copies. The invisible ones, however, resisted." Lestrade turned toward Draycott. "That true?" The man's face was gray. "He's raving. It's trickery. Some stage illusion." Holmes's expression hardened. "Then you will not object to examination by an impartial chemist. I shall summon Professor Challoner from the university. He will verify the compound's properties and the impossibility of replication." Draycott gave a broken laugh. "You think you've trapped me with glowing words? They'll fade. They'll—" Holmes's tone cut him short. "Look again." Even as he spoke, the lines upon Armitage's arm deepened, each stroke brightening as the morning advanced, until they gleamed like veins of light beneath the skin. The sight silenced even Lestrade. Holmes turned to him. "You will escort this man to the yard. The charges, forgery, fraud, attempted concealment of evidence, and, should our witness perish, attempted murder." Lestrade nodded slowly. "You've outdone yourself this time, Holmes. Never thought I'd see the day chemistry put handcuffs on a man." Holmes permitted himself the faintest smile. "Science and justice are not strangers, Inspector, merely acquaintances who meet too rarely." Lestrade signaled to the constable waiting outside. Draycott rose unsteadily, his voice breaking. "You've ruined me, Holmes. The light, it follows me even when I close my eyes." "Then it serves its purpose," Holmes replied. "Let it illuminate your conscience, if not your path." The door closed behind them, and silence returned, save for the soft ticking of the clock, a gentler echo of that omnipresent drip. I looked to Holmes. "You've done it again, but tell me, what of Armitage? Will he recover?" Holmes's eyes softened. "He has survived the night, Watson. The rest belongs to the day." Armitage stirred faintly, the ghost of a smile crossing his lips. The dawn kept its promise. Holmes leaned closer. "Indeed. But tell me, Mr. Armitage, where lies the ledger now, the original, untouched record?" The man's eyes opened halfway. "Hidden, not destroyed, under the nursery floorboard, where the ink first dripped." Holmes nodded. "Then truth has yet one more chamber to reveal." He rose, drawing his coat about him. "Watson, once Lestrade has secured the prisoner, we return to Hampstead. The confession is complete, but the evidence must be sealed. Light may expose guilt, but it is paper that preserves it." I followed him to the door. The sun had risen fully now, glinting upon the wet cobblestones. Behind us, the steady ticking of the clock seemed to merge once more with that remembered rhythm. Drop, beat, breath, as though the case itself continued to pulse faintly within the walls of Baker Street. Holmes paused with his hand on the knob. "Watson, do you notice? The sound persists even here." I listened. Somewhere within the pipes, a single droplet fell, echoing through the silence. Holmes smiled thinly. It appears our ink has not finished speaking. Holmes and I reached Hampstead once more before the morning was half spent. The fog had thinned into a pale veil through which the rooftops shimmered, wet and spectral. Our cab drew up before the Armitage residence, now quiet under the steady fall of that same recurring sound. A gutter dripping rhythmically into the garden basin, as if the house itself remembered. Holmes alighted first, his coat drawn close. "Watson, do you perceive how every pulse of water marks this case's persistence? The crime bleeds through time as ink through paper." Inside, the silence was almost reverent. The light through the window carried a faint violet hue, refracted by the residual chemical in the air. The study lay as we had left it, save for a single clean circle on the desk where the ledger had once rested. A blank absence that seemed to wait. Holmes ascended the staircase without pause. "To the nursery," he said curtly. "Our witness told us the truth is not above but below." We reached the small, dust-coated attic once more. The skylight, now open to the grey sky, dripped steadily into the corner where the ledger had lain. The sound, drop, pause, drop, was so exact, so consistent, that it might have been the same rhythm we had followed from Baker Street. Holmes knelt, studying the boards. "Note, Watson, how the pattern of water falls not randomly, but upon one plank alone. Even nature follows reason when given motive." He produced a small steel tool from his pocket and began to pry gently at the edge of the board. The wood lifted with a long, reluctant sigh. Beneath lay a narrow cavity lined with parchment and old newspaper. Within it, wrapped in oilskin, rested a ledger, untouched by fire or damp. "Behold," Holmes said quietly, "the seed of every deception, preserved by the very element meant to erase it." He laid the book upon the floor. The air thickened with the faint tang of iron and ether as he opened the first page. The ink within, invisible at first glance, began to reveal itself in the dim light. Line by line, word by word, a slow resurrection. "Holmes," I whispered, "it's written in the same hand, yet clearer than before." He nodded. "Because the air itself completes the reaction. Each moment of exposure brings truth closer to visibility. Observe. The handwriting steadies midway through, as though the author's purpose crystallized even as danger drew near." He traced a line with his finger. "To whomsoever finds this record, know that I, Harold Armitage of sound mind, was coerced by one Edmund Draycott into signing fraudulent deeds, transferring estate and title under false pretenses. The ink he supplied, meant for concealment, shall instead serve revelation." Holmes closed the book. "It is conclusive." "But why hide it here?" I asked. "Why not deliver it directly to the authorities?" "Because, my dear Watson," he said, "truth spoken aloud may be silenced. Truth hidden in mechanism endures." He understood his enemies too well. He made light his accomplice and secrecy his refuge. A moral paradox worthy of Spinoza. As he spoke, a faint sound reached us from below, the unmistakable creak of the front door. Holmes's head lifted instantly. "That will be Miss Armitage," he murmured, "or Lestrade, if punctual." The voice that called up, however, was neither. "Mr. Holmes!" It was Mrs. Hudson's anxious tone, breathless and sharp. "There's someone downstairs. Says he must see you at once." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Stay here, Watson. Keep the ledger secure." Before I could protest, he'd vanished down the stair. The dripping continued, slower now, irregular, as if aware its rhythm had lost its audience. Minutes passed. The silence deepened. Then, abruptly, the same sound. Talk, but heavier, metallic this time. I turned. The ledger trembled faintly where it lay open. A single droplet had fallen upon the ink, spreading it outward in a tiny dark bloom. I bent to examine it, and froze. The mark was not random. The droplet had fallen precisely upon one word, altering its color to deep crimson. Draycott. A moment later, Holmes reappeared, his face set in grim resolve. "Watson, that was Lestrade's messenger. Draycott is dead," I started. Dead. An hour passed. Poisoning, they suspect. A letter found upon him bore traces of the same compound, the invisible ink, and 2 words only. "It binds." "The catalyst," I murmured. "He must have ingested it." "Intentionally," Holmes said. "A final attempt to erase his guilt by sharing his victim's fate. He forgot the fundamental law of all chemistry. Reaction cannot be undone, only completed." He crouched beside the ledger once more. "And so, Watson, the confession gains its last witness. The ink upon this page, the mark upon Armitage's flesh, and the death of the forger. 3 linked reactions, 1 truth." I studied his face, the lines sharpened by fatigue, yet illuminated by satisfaction. "You've solved it, Holmes." He shook his head. "No, Armitage solved it. I merely followed his trail of light." He closed the ledger gently, the faint glow of the ink dimming as the cover fell shut. The dripping had ceased entirely. For the first time since the case began, silence held. Holmes straightened. Strange, is it not? The world believes that words fade, yet here they persist beyond their writer's strength, their villain's denial, and even their detective's curiosity. There lies the true alchemy. Not in ink, but in conscience. We descended together, carrying the sealed ledger. Outside, the fog had lifted entirely, and the street shimmered with reflected daylight. Mrs. Hudson waited anxiously in the hall. "Is it finished, Mr. Holmes?" she asked. "For now," he said softly, "though the echo will remain." As we stepped into the street, I heard it again, faint, distant, but distinct, the steady rhythm of water striking stone. It seemed to follow us all the way to the cab, a sound neither wholly natural nor entirely imagined. Holmes paused before entering, his gaze turned back toward the house. "Every truth leaves a resonance, Watson," he murmured. "Listen long enough, and even silence will tell you what it hides." At that instant, the church bell of Hampstead struck noon, each chime clear as falling drops. The bells faded into the hush of midday, their tones still reverberating through the damp air as Holmes settled into the cab beside me. The ledger lay on his knee, wrapped once more in its oilskin, its weight seemingly greater than paper should bear. "Watson," he said after a long pause, "when a man writes with his own blood, it is no longer evidence. It is testimony." I looked toward the retreating silhouette of the Armitage house. "And what shall become of him now?" "Armitage will recover," Holmes replied. "The compound has run its course, and his confession has freed him of the last contagion. Guilt." He tapped the parcel gently. "This will serve as both weapon and shield. Lestrade will have no choice but to let science pronounce judgment." We rode in silence for several streets, the clatter of hooves merging again with that familiar, hollow rhythm, rain gathering in the wheel ruts and striking the undercarriage in soft, deliberate intervals. The motif seemed to travel with us, no longer ominous but measured, resolved. Holmes turned slightly, his gaze distant. "Every investigation, Watson, is a dialogue between silence and revelation. Here, the silence spoke first. Through the missing man, the empty ink bottle, the pauses between drips. Only when we learned to listen did the truth find its tongue. Yet even truth required its own poison," I said. He smiled faintly. "An apt metaphor. Many truths are corrosive, but some purify by corrosion. Draycott's deceit ate through his own defense faster than we could expose it." The cab slowed as we reached Baker Street. Lestrade was waiting on the steps, his bowler hat askew and his coat collar turned up against the drizzle. "Well, Mr. Holmes," he called. "Your miracle ink's made quite a stir. The Yard's chemical man swears it's genuine. Light reactive, indelible. I've got half of Scotland Yard arguing whether to file it under forgery or physics." Holmes descended, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Let them argue, Inspector. The classification matters little. What counts is that you have in your custody both the criminal and the means of his crime." Lestrade followed us inside. "We've taken Draycott's statement, or what passes for one. He was half delirious before the end, muttering about bonds and blood. Seems he thought swallowing the ink would cleanse him." "A poetic if misguided act," Holmes said dryly. He forgot that the reaction he began could not distinguish repentance from deceit. Lestrade sniffed. "Never saw the like. Never will again, I hope. But I'll grant you this, Holmes. You've solved it in a fashion no man could question. The Yard will call it one for the record books." "Records," Holmes mused, "are but ledgers of daylight, Inspector, and some ledgers shine brighter than others." Lestrade gave a half smile. "Always the philosopher, eh? Well, I'll see to the paperwork. Good day, gentlemen." He turned and clattered down the steps, leaving the faint echo of his boots mingling with the steady patter of rain. When the door closed, Holmes removed the ledger from its wrapping and placed it upon the table. The afternoon light crept across the window pane, touching the cover so that it seemed to exhale faint luminescence. He stood over it for a moment, fingers lightly resting upon the worn leather. "Curious, is it not?" he said softly. "This book holds more life than its author at his weakest, more death than its villain at his end. Within it, chemical law and moral law are identical, both reactive, both precise." I watched him in silence. There was a rare gentleness in his tone, a trace of melancholy I'd heard only after those cases which touched something within him beyond intellect. "Holmes," I said, "you speak as though the matter troubles you still." He glanced toward me, the faintest glint of reflection in his eyes. "It does, Watson, because the line between revelation and destruction is perilously fine. Armitage sought to reveal truth through light, yet that same light might have killed him. Knowledge without restraint is a flame. In this case, it nearly consumed its bearer." "Yet without that flame," I said quietly, "we should never have seen the crime." "Precisely," Holmes murmured. "Hence my unease." He opened the ledger once more. The ink within glowed dimly, its words visible even in shadow. "It will fade, of course, when deprived of light," he said, "but it will not vanish. No solvent known to man can erase a confession written in its own element." There was a pause. Then, from the corner of the room, a faint sound, a drop falling into the coal scuttle by the hearth. Both of us turned. The window, left slightly ajar, had allowed the rain to creep in. Holmes regarded it with an expression somewhere between amusement and recognition. "So the motif persists," he said. "A reminder, perhaps, that every solved case leaves residue, a single drop of uncertainty." He closed the ledger and carried it to the cabinet where he stored the strangest relics of our adventures. The ivory box from Norwood, the blue carbuncle's broken setting, the charred remains of the engineer's sleeve. Placing the volume carefully beside them, he shut the door with a quiet click. "That, Watson," he said, "completes the experiment." I leaned back in my chair, the fire crackling softly. "And what lesson do you draw from it, Holmes?" He considered. "That truth, like ink, must sometimes pass through darkness before it can be read, and that even when the page is closed, the words remain, waiting for light." Armitage, I later learned, recovered fully. His health returned, though his hair had gone prematurely white. He left London to live quietly near Oxford, where he devoted his remaining years to what he called ethical chemistry. As for the peculiar ink, its formula was never found among his papers. Holmes suspected he destroyed it, saying once that no man should wield a truth that cannot fade. The rain eased, and for a moment all sound stilled, until a final droplet, slow and deliberate, fell from the window-sill onto the hearth. The faint tock echoed through the sitting room, familiar now as a heartbeat ending its measure. Holmes looked up from his violin, bow poised. There it is again, Watson, the cadence of conclusion. And with a quiet nod, he drew the bow across the strings. The first note matched the falling drop precisely, a single resonant tone that seemed to carry all the silence that followed. The violin's note lingered in the air, its resonance fading like a ripple in still water. Holmes lowered the bow, allowing the silence to absorb the vibration, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Only the faint sound of that ever-present drip, now distant, softened by rain upon the window pane, reminded us that the city still breathed beyond the walls of Baker Street. "Holmes," I said at last, "you speak of conclusion, but I sense you are not yet content." He gave a short laugh, low and tired. "Contentment, Watson, is a luxury for those who seek peace. I pursue equilibrium, a subtler chemistry." I smiled. "Between what elements?" "Between justice and mercy," he answered, setting the violin aside. "The reaction is volatile and the proportion uncertain." He turned his gaze to the cabinet where the ledger now rested. "Consider, my dear fellow. Armitage wrote with a compound that bound truth to blood. It exonerated him, yes, but it also killed one man and nearly destroyed another. Was the formula itself moral, or only its use?" "You cannot blame science for the heart that wields it," I said. "True," he mused. "Yet science, once created, obeys no master. Even now the composition of that ink troubles me. There was an element unaccounted for." I started. "You mean to analyze it further?" He nodded. "Curiosity demands it, not for the sake of glory, but for safety. Should another mind attempt the same experiment, London might one day wake to find its streets glowing with unwanted confessions." I laughed uneasily, but Holmes's expression remained grave. "You jest, surely?" "Only in degree," he said. "Armitage's solution contained a stabilizing protein, his own blood, but also a catalytic base we did not identify. My suspicion is that he derived it from an industrial dye, something capable of adhering to organic tissue indefinitely. Then his discovery could be reproduced?" Holmes's eyes darkened. "If one were reckless enough to try." He rose and crossed to his chemical table, where rows of flasks gleamed faintly in the firelight. I preserved a trace from the broken bottle. "Let us see whether the ghost still reacts." I followed him reluctantly. "Holmes, must we revive this?" "Only to bury it properly." He uncorked a small vial, poured a few drops onto a glass slide, and held it beneath the lamp. The liquid shimmered faintly, the same elusive violet we had come to know, and for an instant letters formed upon the surface. Holmes leaned closer. "Lux vincit," he read aloud. "Light conquers." He drew in a slow breath. "Watson, do you grasp what that implies? The compound was self-referential. It carried its own axiom. It reacts not merely to light, but to the idea of exposure. An empirical allegory, if ever nature composed one." I frowned. "You suggest intention? That the chemistry itself sought truth?" He smiled without mirth. "No, merely that it mirrored the man who made it. Armitage built into his creation the one thing he valued beyond survival: illumination. It is a moral principle expressed in matter, a philosophy that glows." The lamp flickered, throwing moving reflections across his face. For the first time I saw genuine wonder in his eyes, stripped of calculation. "Even now," he murmured, "the world is written in invisible ink, waiting for its proper light." I placed a hand upon his shoulder. "And what of you, Holmes? Does the same rule hold?" He glanced sideways at me. "I am no ink, my dear fellow. I am the lens." The answer, so characteristic, drew a laugh from me, yet beneath it lay something almost wistful. The case had ended, the villain punished, the innocent absolved. And yet Holmes remained restless, as though each solved mystery only deepened the shadow of the next. He corked the vial again and sealed it in wax. This fragment shall remain here, locked away. The formula dies with Armitage, and so it must. And the ledger? I asked. Transferred to the court tomorrow, he replied. Though its evidence shines, it will be read as ordinary script by then. The light fades naturally once justice takes hold. Another fine symmetry. We sat together by the fire, the hours slipping quietly past. Outside, the rain had ceased, but from the gutter above came the final slow rhythm of water dropping from metal to stone. Holmes stared into the embers. Do you recall, Watson, how the first sound that drew us into this case was a tremor in an ink bottle? I do indeed. He smiled faintly. And now it ends with the same cadence. A reminder that the smallest vibrations may awaken the most stubborn truths. The room dimmed as the fire sank lower. Holmes's silhouette, lean and angular, seemed etched in chiaroscuro, intellect framed by shadow. He spoke again, his tone softer. There are nights when I envy men like Armitage. He erred, yes, but he believed that the world could be redeemed through exposure. My task, instead, is to reveal and withdraw, never to judge. You judge Holmes, but you do so in silence. He regarded me thoughtfully. Perhaps. Yet silence is the truest verdict of all. Once spoken, it cannot be appealed. The clock on the mantel struck 2, its chime joining the faint dripping outside in a rhythm slow and final. Holmes rose, extinguished the lamp, and stood for a moment in the half-light, his face unreadable. Watson, he said quietly, when I'm gone, see that this case is not forgotten. Write it plainly, without embellishment. Let those who read it understand that truth, though delayed, is inexorable. I shall, I said. He nodded once. Then the matter rests. We sat again, the fire's last glow flickering between us. A final droplet slid from the window ledge and struck the sill with that familiar, hollow tone. Holmes lifted his gaze toward it, listening. Do you hear? He murmured. It has changed pitch, from guilt to peace. He reached for his violin, plucked one string, and let the note hang, the same resonance as the drip itself, carried forward like a heartbeat into the quiet dawn.